Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments here in Israel, throughout the region and beyond, with chief focus on the northern front vis-a-vis Hezbollah in Lebanon, as well as prospects of an imminent strike against the Islamic Republic of Iran, it's always important to remember how this war began. 383 days ago, on October 7th of last year, the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates in the Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 250 people, including elderly men, women, children, and infants. 101 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. The subsequent day, on October 8th of last year, Iran essentially joined that war when it greenlighted its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, to launch cross-border attacks from Lebanon into Israel. And since then, Hezbollah has done just that, with over 12,000 projectiles being launched towards Israeli territory. And not Hezbollah alone. Additional proxies have joined the fight from Yemen, from Syria, from Iraq, as well as Iran proper. And for that, let's now turn to TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, what can you tell us about the latest? Iran is threatening Israel with all kind of signaling, messaging of a anticipated retaliatory strike to the retaliation strike, something, of course, that can spiral into an all-out regional war.
Yes, indeed. It doesn't sound as if the Iranian leadership is confident and self-assured. Rather, they are speaking out of fear because they don't really know what to expect. Defense Minister Gallant earlier today has made a point of visiting the Air Force base at Hatzerim. And this is a base where the 69th Squadron is based. And why am I saying that this is making a point? Because a few days ago, of course, some classified documents which focused on this very squadron in this very base and the preparation for an Iran attack. These documents were leaked, and there is now an FBI investigation into this leak. But rather than shy away from it, the Israeli defense minister visited the squadron. The base is commanded by a former commander of this squadron, Brigadier General Amichai Levin, and Gallant emphasized that this base, this squadron, and the entire Air Force, air crews as well as ground crews, have participated in many important, some of them secret missions, both against Hezbollah, some in Gaza and elsewhere, actually throughout the 7 fronts in which Israel is involved. Let me just mention that today, October the 23rd, is also the 41st anniversary of the Beirut barracks bombing. Back in 1983, more than 240 servicemen, American servicemen, were murdered by a Hezbollah suicide truck. And therefore, there are lessons there, both for the U.S. ability to contribute for a peacekeeping mission, but also for the fact that the U.S. is always on the Hezbollah and Iranian target list.
Indeed. Not to forget, of course, that French service members were also killed in that event, and our heart goes out to the families who are still grieving and mourning their lost ones so many years after. But let's now turn to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by retired Colonel Joel Rayburn, a former senior director of the National Security Council for pretty much the entire Levant, as former U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, currently the founding director of the American Center for Levant Studies, as well as a senior fellow at Hudson Institute. It's good to see you, Joel. I'd like to ask you particularly about the leak. What does it mean? Basically, from an American perspective rather than an Israeli perspective. There were reports in Hebrew press referring to a lady called Ariana Tabatbai, who is of an Iranian origin, who serves in Pentagon, and apparently she was responsible for that leak. Of course, the FBI is currently conducting its own investigation, so we won't go into all of the details. But nonetheless, I'd like to hear your point on this, and what signal does it send also to the Iranians?
Well, I think the first thing is the we're not going to know the results of this investigation. I think for a while, so I think it was premature for some sources to start uh, naming people and so on. There's no possible way that the leaker could be known at that stage. So I think it's people should be circumspect about reports like that. Also, not only I think there was a jumping to conclusions on that score, um, which was probably at best premature, and as I say, people need to take with a big grain of salt. But secondly, there was also a lot of speculation, I think, that well, maybe this was a calculated leak from a political leak, et cetera. And I think that can be discounted. There's no way that any U.S. administration would behave that way with that kind of material. I mean, having been inside the U.S. intelligence community a little bit, I can tell you that there's just no way that kind of thing would happen. And I also, I coming from that community, I know that there will be right now going on a massive search across the entire intelligence community to find the source of the leak, not just in order to try hold someone accountable, but also to plug a gap in the system, obviously, because until the identity of a leaker like that is discovered, the intelligence community can't know whether it's an ongoing threat. So the community has to protect its information and its systems by shutting that sort of thing down. So I think a lot of the conspiracy theories, the speculation about it, I think are probably unwarranted, and people should wait and see what happens. But now on the substance of it, yeah, it's damaging. I think any revelation of some sensitive information like that at the top secret level is damaging, not just because of those specific reports, but it gives because often at that level, unfortunately, it can reveal sources and methods, and it can tell adversaries more about the way the United States is collecting and analyzing information. That's almost as damaging as the substance of what you see on the page itself. And so it is damaging. It's got to be plugged, and it does unfortunately lend itself to a lack of confidence in an intelligence sharing relationship between us and our allies, not just with Israeli allies right now, but others who have shared information with whom we have an intelligence sharing relationship will now be going back and looking at their sharing with us. The same thing happened years ago with the release of all the WikiLeaks cables and so on, and it's damaging. It's damaging not just to not just operationally, it's damaging to the confidence between intelligence sharing allies, which makes us all less safe.
Absolutely, it's a sad day, not only for the American intelligence community, but also that of all allies and partners around the world, namely the Five Eyes, Israeli intelligence community, and others who are working day and night to keep Western civilization safe. But let's now turn to Central Israel, where we're joined by Colonel in Reserve Miri Eisen, formerly a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate, senior advisor also at the Prime Minister's office, and a senior fellow at the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University in Herzliya. Colonel Eisen, I'd like to hear only just a sentence or two from you on that specifically, since I'd like to touch on what's going on in the region and that key aspect that now we're hearing Ayatollah Ali Khamenei coming out and claiming victory. Apparently, he identifies as a victor, but nonetheless, it seems like that identity is far from the truth.
So I'm going to start and talk just for a moment about that aspect of a leak, because the biggest challenge, since we have the type of what we call open source information where everything is out there, and what do you keep secret has become a much bigger challenge, because you can find everything online, including satellite images that may not be the US ones, but they're going to be the Russian or the Chinese or whoever sells them to you. And as such, it becomes that question of what information do we keep secret? And I very much relate to what Joel was saying before, because there's a lot about the trust, meaning you're supposed to keep things secret so that you can continue to have a relationship between decision makers and the intelligence community, between different intelligence communities around the world. That is part of where we live. And I pose it as a challenge. There's no easy answer for it. Having said all of that, I look around, and you quoted Khamenei. He's a big tweeter, for those who don't know. He's on X or whoever does it for him. And he puts out quite a bit of information in that way. And not only has Khamenei, the supreme religious leader, been active, but the president of Iran and the foreign minister of Iran are being active. The one is at the BRIC conference taking place in Central Asia. The other has been wandering around the different countries of the Middle East. So for a moment, as we zoom out, look at what Iran is trying to do. It's trying to do diplomacy. And when it does diplomacy, like with everything else, it needs to show that what it does is winning. So Khamenei calls Israel the cancer of the world, that if you just cut us out, everything is resolved. That's what Khamenei says pretty much every single week. But if you add into it that what he's saying right now is, look at us, Iran. We right now are participating in the world. There's been a lot of, not dialogue, but words over the last few weeks. Certainly the last 2 weeks since the buildup to an Israeli attack that is against the Islamic regime of Iran, against the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, against those that are the ones that have been calling for our destruction. And the words that they're using are not just to their own people, because when he says they're winning, to me, that's for his own people. He said it in Persian to himself. But when he sends out the president, when he sends out the foreign minister, who are not the important figures, because they're not the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, but he's sending them in diplomatic missions to different places, that's showing Iran that doesn't want to be isolated. And I say that's good on us. If we've managed in our rhetoric, in our action, in our anticipation of whatever action we do, make the Islamic regime of Iran feel that they need to say that they're winning when they're not, where they need to go out and engage, I'm all for it. I want them to feel under stress. I want them to feel under attack, both diplomatic and otherwise. What I'm going to add into this is, sadly, right now, in that sense, we have a lot of challenges where the Russias and the Chinas are not on the side that I would like to see them. And Israel right now has to talk a lot more in that sense with our other partners here in the Middle East, because that Iranian reach out is not just to the Russia and to the China, it's to Egypt and to Saudi Arabia, it's to the countries in and around, and we need to make sure that they don't want to be in confrontation, but that all of these countries understand who is the one who will stand up to that Islamic regime's rhetoric, and they're only ones that are really willing to act.
Shifting gears to the battlefields in the immediate front, namely northern Israel, Lebanon. Mr. Oren, what can you tell us about the latest? We see plenty of sorties, particularly on Tyre and also Dahyan, Beirut.
Right. Tyre, the coastal town closest to the Israeli border on the Mediterranean coast. And actually, if one looks at the geography, directly across from Haifa and other places in northern Israel, has been spared up to now. But today, the Israeli Air Force has struck command and control nodes belonging to Hezbollah in Tyre. And in addition, of course, kept striking the Dahya, southern Beirut targets belonging to Hezbollah, and has confirmed that 3 weeks ago, indeed, Hashem Sefi Adin, Nasrallah's cousin and acting Hezbollah Secretary General when Nasrallah was abroad or somewhere else. He has been eliminated in an Israeli strike, along with the intelligence chief of Hezbollah and 25 other terrorists who convened underground, supposedly in a secure bunker. But the Israeli Air Force has trained and perfected the art of subterranean strikes. And this is also a message to the Iranians. And if I may add to what you said about Khamenei, this could also be, let's say we won and cut a deal sort of message to Hezbollah, not to Israel or the United States, but saying to Hezbollah, let's cut any deal available on the table before this gets out of hand and gets to us in Tehran. So it may also have a positive nature, this sort of bravado.
Possibly, albeit you just mentioned Hashim Safiuddin. I happen to have all the various figures of Hezbollah's chain of command in my office, and every time one is eliminated, I cross them off. Who is he speaking to? There are not many people left. And for that matter, the person right now that is directing and orchestrating much of Hezbollah's activities in Lebanon with the various field operatives happens to be an IRGC Quds Force officer rather than a Lebanese one. Again, is he speaking to his own troops in the field? I'm not sure that was the specific messaging, possibly to the various followers in Lebanon, but with the strife that they're facing right now, I highly doubt that they actually accept the definition of victory. But Colonel Rayburn, I'd like to hear your note on this. And another point, an interesting point, there is messaging coming out of Damascus to Hezbollah and to Iran proper. Leave us out of it. Is Bashar al-Assad terrified? Well, terrified, I'm sure he is. But what is his calculus? I hear that the UAE has something to do with it.
Well, I mean, first on Khamenei's messaging, when Ali Khamenei, who blocks Twitter/X in Iran, puts out a tweet in English, who is the audience? The audience is the West. The audience is the United States, the West, and Europe. That's just a propaganda channel. So I mean, you should you treat it accordingly. That's part of messaging from a regime that's engaged in a war. It's part of their battle plan. It's a big part of their battle plan. The information front, if you will. On Syria, yeah. I mean, if you're Bashar al-Assad, I mean, you've known for a long time, if you're the Assad regime, that you are vulnerable to Israeli action if it ever comes to a confrontation, even much more vulnerable than Hezbollah has been. Hezbollah has been attempted to harden itself as a target over years and years. I mean, the Assad regime doesn't have that. So yeah, the Assad regime is just sort of whistling off in the corner, trying not to be noticed as part of this axis of resistance. That's been true for quite some time. So if you're Bashar al-Assad in this whole conflict, of course you don't want to declare yourself as a combatant in this conflict, because you could be taken out even more easily than the Iraqi Hashid. I think he has an awful lot to lose. And against this backdrop, yes, there does appear to be yet another attempt to remarket Assad as just, so close. He's so close to being able to flip out of the axis of resistance and back into whether it's the Arab fold or the U.S. European fold or whatever, for the umpteenth time since he took power. But also, this is the one card that the Assad regime, both this regime of Hafiz al-Assad and now Bashar al-Assad, has had to play, is to dangle itself as available for flipping for the last 40, 50 years. And it never happens. It's always, it's always, I mean, in an American kids context, Lucy and the football. It's always something that's dangled that's not real, and isn't going to happen. How many times have there been, whether someone interlocutors from the Arab world or from Europe or Lebanon, come and say, I mean, Bashar, he's so uncomfortable be with this really dependency that he's got on Iran. Boy, he would just love to, you know, renew relations. If only you guys would just sort of make a goodwill gesture, like unilaterally lifting sanctions, for example. Can you just do, oh man, he would just, he's not really with them. He's uncomfortable there. It's over and over again. 2005, 2007, 2008, 2009, on and on and on. So it's just the latest chapter of that.
Indeed. Well, Colonel Eisen, the Russians are quite active when we're talking about the Islamic Republic of Iran. Israel maintains a deconfliction mechanism for the Syrian theater for obvious reasons. We don't want to get into a full-fledged confrontation with the Russians on our northern front in addition to the other adversaries. But at the same time, we do see that the electronic warfare that they implemented in Latakia is implemented also now in Iran. There are now reports about the Russians preparing to provide the Iranians with early warning in the event of Israeli activity to go out and conduct whatever is planned for the Iranians. What should be done in this context?
There's never an easy answer. It's not either or. I think that what we're looking at, like I'd like to say as an Israeli right now, stop the relations with Russia. They're backing the Iranians. They're receiving from Iran the different type of UAVs and warfare. And that's like, take that point. And I'm like, that doesn't always work that way. The Russian influence inside Syria is still of importance. In its own way, it's both an impediment, but also an important part for Israel in the arena. The fact that Israel can attack and has killed in the last week top Hezbollah operatives at the heart of Damascus. I'm going to say allegedly, but who else attacks in the heart of Damascus in the El Mazeh neighborhood and kills them? The Hezbollah operative who is responsible for much of the weaponry that's going back and forth. And that is literally, like, for the Americans listening here, half a mile from Bashar's palace, meaning the Israeli capability to be able to do a pinpointed attack at the heart of Damascus while this is going on has to do also with what you called that deconfrontation with Russia, because Russia is the one who is supposedly able to protect Syria to a certain degree. Under the radar in this last week, as allegedly Israel killed this top Hezbollah operative inside Damascus, in addition, we have seen that Russia, using Russian airplanes, is bombing, I never know how to call them because they're not good guys, but they're bombing Syrian opposition forces that are in northern Syria, and that's kind of under the radar. So if we talk about Russia's position, under Putin, we have seen very clearly that Russia, certainly in this war, has taken, for me as an Israeli, the absolute other side. Having said that, do I, because of that, divorce it completely, not work with them at all, and call it out? I'm not sure that that's in my best interest. And as such, you try to meander in between these very difficult paths.
I just call them terrorists. But when we're talking about Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, its leader... I know, but Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, its leader, al-Julani, the former head, of course, of Jabhat al-Nusra, who is one of the closest confidants of the slain Adawahiri, Ayman Adawahiri of Al-Qaeda, I mean, for all intents and purposes, a terrorist.
No, that one I agree with. I thought you were talking about Russia for a moment. My mistake.
No. We have 2 minutes left for all of you, so keep it short. Each one has a closing statement. What would you like to focus on is up to you. Mr. Owen, we'll start with you.
The biggest news out of Russia today is that North Korean soldiers have been spotted there. The Department of Defense in Washington has published this with a lot of concern. They are not yet fighting in the Ukraine, but this only goes to show you that the main arena for Russia is not the Middle East, not Israel, Hezbollah, Hamas, but rather Ukraine. At the same time, for Iran, obviously, we are top of the list.
Colonel Rayburn?
Well, listen, a quick aside on Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. When the Assad regime and the Russians are bombing somebody in Idlib or in rural Aleppo, it's usually not Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. There's sort of a non-aggression pact between Jilani and the Assad regime, and it's usually just IDP camps or somebody other that's actually in opposition to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. That's one thing. The second thing I like to mention, and maybe this is something we can expand upon in a subsequent show, is there are big things happening. I think on with Turkey, the death of Fethullah Gulen is seismic in Turkish politics, and also a major removal of a major source of friction between the United States and Turkey. That's been festering for a long time, and we went into overdrive after the 2016 coup. That's big. There's also another big development, which is Devlet Bahçeli, who's been the most anti-PKK and really anti-Kurdish politician in Ankara, has called for Öcalan to be allowed to come and speak to the Turkish parliament and lead to a peace process between the Turkish government and the PKK. I mean, this also could be seismic, and the fact that it happened right as the death of Fethullah Gulen was confirmed, I think, is not an accident. There are big things potentially happening on that front.
We will undoubtedly touch on that in the near future. Colonel Eisen?
I'm going to bring it back to Israel and Iran. I think that the next week there's like a rolling of the drums, and none of us know what will happen. What will Israel do? What will Iran's response be? And again, from what you brought up, I'm worried about Russia. I'm kind of worried about Turkey because I don't see this as something contained. And I think that this is something that's in front of us in the near future.
Thank you, Colonel Eisen. I'll immediately also thank Colonel Rayburn and Mr. Oren for all of your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well, and seize this opportunity to highlight TV7 Israel is a donation-based nonprofit, and therefore if you're blessed by our productions, such as this one, and would like to help support us produce more of this, more of TV7 Israel News, Jerusalem Studio, Deep Dive, and much more, please go to our website where you'll be able to support us with a donation at www.tv7israelnews.com. Separately, I'd like to note, because of today being Simchat Torah Eve, TV7 Israel will not broadcast our daily bulletin, namely TV7 Israel News. We will air, though, at 9 p.m. instead of that, our Jerusalem studio production, which is going to be quite interesting, to include also Professor Russell Berman and others. So until 9 p.m. tonight, wishing you once again Chag Sameach and Shalom from Jerusalem.